Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see the red box now. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our business committee meeting. I'll call the meeting to order. And first, I'd like to also acknowledge with great respect and humility the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ageless tradition, teachings, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity. And I also just personally wanted to add, I don't know about all of you out there, but today I was grateful to see that shining sun peeking through our smoky skies. It sure felt like some hope to me. So this evening, I'll ask if there are any additions to the agenda. And I better open up that conversation box so that I can see that. Any additions to the agenda? Seeing none. A change or deletions to the agenda? Seeing none. I'll ask for notice if there are any objections to the agenda as presented tonight. Okay, I don't see any. I'll ask for you to now refer to page 4 for the approval of the minutes from our June 10th meeting. Moved by Chair McKay, seconded by Trustee Stanley. Any opposed to the approval of the minutes? Okay, seeing none, we'll now move to the presentation portion of the agenda. I'll like to, sorry. There are no presentations this evening. I always muddle that part up between reports and presentations. So part 8 of our agenda, senior staff reports. I'd now like to introduce Superintendent Scott Saywell and Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh to update us on the restart plan update. I know they're out there.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll begin, and perhaps Secretary Treasurer Walsh will jump in a little bit. I'll start by sharing our latest enrollment numbers, and I'll start with our transition learning program, which has 418 students in it. So you'll recall that we had over 1,000 parents respond that they were a little bit nervous and were looking for some other type of program. Ultimately, 418 of those parents enrolled in this program, enrolled their children in this program. 384 elementary students will be in the program and 34 secondary students. So that's 3 in total, 391 English and 27 French immersion students in the transition learning program. In the DL program, we have a total of 564 students K to 9. So 564 students K to 9. There are 133 continuing students in K to 9 as well on top of that. So they were already registered in Learn at Home. Of course, it is a, sorry, I said Learn at Home, Island Connect Ed, the new name for Learn at Home or DL program. And so they were a 12-month program. So there was already 133 K to 9 students in that program, and they're joined by 564 new K to 9 students. That breaks down with 58 French immersion students, 58 French immersion students, K to 9, who opted for DL, and 508 regular track students, English students who opted for DL. We also have 212 grade 10 to 12 students who, as you know, can be cross-enrolled. So they're taking one course at a time. So 212 grade 12 students who are taking what we would call singleton courses. In total, 564 K to 9, 212 10 to 12, grade 10 to 12 students, and 133 students who were already in the program enrolled, gives us a total of just over 900 students in the program, 909 students taking DL this year. Finally, in homeschooling, we have 71 students, and that breaks down 67 students in elementary and 4 students in secondary. So all of those staff members, and thank you to Deputy Superintendent Tim Davey, Assistant Superintendents Laura Tate and Dawn Belcombe, the entire Learning Services team and principals and vice principals for working on this, making it possible. And so now we begin the task of hiring new teachers and new staff members to positions to run these programs essentially. And we've opened up Woodlands Secondary School to house these staff members. In COVID news, we have 12 active cases on the island. We have no concerns, and this is from our medical health officer, Dr. Benuzit, no concerns of community transmission presently, which is a good thing. And the percentage of people who have tested positive on a 7-day average is 0.3%. Air quality index at 7, but that's supposed to go up by tomorrow back to 10 for the end of the week, and then peter out until Monday. In other sort of, yep.
Scott, I'm just going to pause there. If you'll
Sure.
entertain, I have two trustees that have indicated they've got questions. So before you get too deep in the report, Trustee Brezovich.
Thank you, through the chair. Mr. Saywell, what does that mean in terms of, and this may be, I may have forgotten because I read my agenda a few days ago. What does this mean in terms of numbers of adding, how many teachers will need to add to DL?
We will be adding initially 10 full-time equivalent teachers to DL.
Okay, and may I follow up? Chair?
Yes, you may.
And what's the timeline on the postings? How long do we think it's going to take to get them hired?
Well, the postings go out for a week, and
Okay.
so what we do is we have TTOCs to fulfill those positions until we can get our continuing teachers hired to the positions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. Thanks for those numbers. I'm just wondering if you could give me a percentage of students who have returned to full-time bricks and mortar.
Percentage of, well, I could, yeah, thank you. Great question. Through you, Madam Chair. So we have, I'll expose myself a little bit, do the quick math. So 418 students in the transition program. That's going to be about 3%, I would say, something like that. So it's 418 out of 15,000. Almost just a little over 900 in DL. So what's that? 6%, let's say. And then we have homeschoolers. So what's that, Trustee Higginson? Over 90% return to in-class instruction.
Thanks. Could I have a follow-up quickly?
Yes, you may, Trustee Higginson.
On the transition program, what is the cutoff date?
Cutoff date is November the 6th.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Superintendent Saywell. If you wanted to continue on, I just wanted to capture those questions. I felt like they may have been part of that first part of the report. So
awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I'll finish off with a couple of highlights. Good news, we have our food delivery program continues. It is also running out of Woodland Secondary School now, and we have, along with our staff members there, we have 30 volunteers working with Nanaimo Ladysmith Schools Foundation to deliver food. That is a big deal. We've increased supervision at 9 elementary schools at lunch hour to ensure that our learning cohorts stay apart. This is really great news as well. We have starting tomorrow, Thursday, 7 classrooms of grade 12 students will begin tomorrow at VIU, thanks to VIU President Deb Saucier and her team in facilities to being responsive to our needs. So 7 classrooms whereby ND students in grade 12 will take their courses up at VIU. And really what that does is to just take a bunch more students out of, it's kind of a dual purpose really in the end. It takes a few students out of ND, makes it a little less crowded, as well as it gives those students in grade 12 an opportunity to be up at VIU. So I think that's a great idea. I'll finish by saying that if the greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassionate action of its members, then Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools is one awesome community. I'm very appreciative of all of our staff members pitching in. It's been a great startup. I truly believe that once we put our staff members back together with students, most, not all, but most of the fear and anxiety melted away, dissolved, and I think we're doing very well right now. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Superintendent Saywell. And I also want to extend that thanks and to all the work that you've done as well on this. Did Secretary Treasurer Walsh have any update on this piece, or should we move into the 8.2?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was just here to assist the superintendent in responding to any questions about the restart if required. So
okay. Perhaps I could prompt through you, Madam Chair, if it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can I prompt Secretary Treasurer Walsh to just talk about where we're at with masks?
Sure. So through you, Madam Chair. So I think from our previous update, we've got our masks out to schools, so all staff will have access to their reusable masks. I think, as we noted, we had a batch of student masks that were larger sizes that we were able to share with staff as well. We have not had any reports of shortages of student masks. We still have disposables that's cited at schools in case they don't have them. We still do have some student masks still coming in that we'll be able to distribute as well. While not required in the elementary setting, we do have reusables going to be available for our students if again requested in the elementary setting. We have not had any requests centrally for additional plastic face shields for staff yet. And so again, if we run out of the batch that we have, they're relatively easy to acquire. I think we've had a little bit of a demand on masks with the face, with the plastic so you can see someone's mouth. Those ones are quite expensive, so we have limited access to staff to those for those folks working with students particularly that would require that ability to see the teacher's mouth. So we're working through that particular issue. We have not received all of our masks again, but we are fully stocked at schools, able to address through either the reusables or the disposables. And we're just making sure, hearing from our partners where their communication breakdowns might be about how masks can be accessible and trying to make sure that we're responsive to that. So just want to express our appreciation for the feedback where there might be concerns, but at this point we look pretty good, and we continue to get feedback and are prepared to increase our supply if required.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. I have a question here from Business Vice Chair Trustee Keller.
Yes, thank you through the chair. Really appreciate receiving regular updates on our back to school plan. So thanks to everyone who's put in the time and effort for this. My question to staff is, just as we move forward, what are we thinking in terms of, or what are our plans, perhaps is a better way to put it, in terms of monitoring the success of our back to school plan, getting feedback from staff and students, and implementing ongoing improvement?
You're muted, Scott.
I know. Yeah, thanks, Trustee Keller. Great question to make sure we're monitoring the success of all of our programs, particularly DL and sort of our newly developed transition learning program. So typically we do program reviews by getting out into schools and typically with principals and vice principals, getting their response about how programs are going. Also through learning services as well, who are on the ground reviewing programs all the time. So we don't have any plans presently to survey parents or students about the programming, but it's kind of feet on the ground. Thank you.
Did you have a follow-up to that, Trustee Keller?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Higginson has a question.
Thank you. Through the chair to the superintendent. At one point there was talk for this transition program that we would be utilizing our or hiring TOCs for that. And I'm just wondering if that's the case and if we expect it to have an impact on our ability to fill for the next couple of months if this is going till November 6th.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Great question. Through you, Madam Chair. I'll start, and Deputy Superintendent Tim Davey is leading this, so he might respond. But I appreciate your concern. It is our concern as well. We have approximately 250 teachers teaching on call, and this will take away certainly for a short period of time while the transition learning program is operative. It's going to take away 30 teachers from the teacher on call roster. So that is a great concern for us. We did have a few failure to fills last year, and that always concerns us, but we are hiring all the time, and we're doing our best to get more teachers into our ranks and on our teacher teaching on call roster. I'll pause. There might be something to add from Mr. Davey. I'm not sure.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent Saywell, and through the chair. The only thing I will add is that there are a couple of occurrences where we had surplus teachers in schools that we've been able to work with the NDTA and move those students over to the DL program for support here. So a couple of those positions at least are taken care of through that process. Thank you.
Okay. Any follow-up, Trustee Higginson? No, all right. I'd like to invite NDTA President Woods to ask a question. Wood, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me. I have a new microphone and I'm not sure how good it is. Okay, I have a question about custodials. So are we, do we have enough custodians hired? Because I am hearing that cleaning of portables is an issue.
So through you, Madam. Oh.
I just was going to ask if Mr. Saywell was on the call and he popped up. So I take it, Mr. Saywell, you might have something to add to this conversation.
Yes, I can start us off. Thank you. I do have some information. So there are two questions. One is, yes, we're currently hiring, continuing to hire custodians to fill vacant positions and our temp list. So we have an appropriate amount of temporary custodians. We continue to onboard custodians. So there's one thing to get them hired. There's another to get them appropriately onboarded and trained and outfitted and using our equipment like the Clorox 360, etc. So that's in process, and we are not quite fully staffed yet. However, we are meeting all of our assignment needs. There's some overtime pressures right now, but as staff come on, that's going to be alleviated. But we are getting to all the tasks. We are not doing the Clorox 360 in portables. That's not because we don't have staff. That's because of the moving the machines out to the portables through the weather, potential damage, etc. So right now we are in fact doing the portables by wiping them down, which is an equal and acceptable method of disinfecting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wood, did you have a follow-up question?
No, I was just concerned about portables having to be cleaned manually and the time that takes and whether or not that is happening. But we can follow up at a later time on that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I see no further questions. Thank you, Superintendent Saywell, Mr. Sabo, and Secretary Treasurer Walsh. I'll now move on to point 8.2 of the agenda. Secretary Treasurer on the agenda item financial year-end surplus allocation.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, trustees, for the opportunity to present this evening. I do want to start off by recognizing the work that our financial service team has done in preparing the financial year-end statements, and particularly want to recognize the work of our newly married, she's getting used to Mrs. Penner, our director, acting director Penner, who's here this evening as well, and you know her as Miss Fedja, but so just want to recognize that. So I want to start off just in general terms on what the purpose of the presentation this evening is for. And so the board in a week's time is going to have the auditors actually come and see them, and the audit report will be available. And so that's going to touch on whether there's any concerns, and just the timing of it all. We don't have that report for you this evening, but I can certainly say that the report came back healthy, and you will see that report in the very short term. So really the focus of the audited financial statements is, of course, to ask questions to trustees on variances that you might see in the report. But one really important factor, or two really important things to focus on this evening is the restrictions that have been presented in the financial statements by staff. And to make sure that trustees understand that or are comfortable with the restrictions as presented, because you all will be asked to pass the financial statements, which will include those restrictions in the document. And number two, however, though, is if there is going to be changes to those restrictions, we have a fairly limited amount of time that will change our financial statements generally. And so it's important to get a sense of what the board or what trustees are thinking. Initially, we had recommendations for the committee to recommend to the board to go through with pass the financial statements as is, but prudently, I think, without the actual audit report to suggest that there is no concerns from an external audit perspective, it is a little bit premature to make those specific recommendations. So this evening, I am going to focus almost exclusively on the financial statement discussion and analysis rather than the financial statements themselves. And I want to do that because the numbers, or the report, the financial statement discussion and analysis, is just those numbers in words, and in a way that's a little bit easier to digest, and I think to responds very thoroughly to wherever there may be any differences from year to year for the board. So happy to answer any specific questions about those, about the financial statement document, but I will not be going through that document this evening, again, subject to questions. So what I would like to start out with is, if you turned to page, and I'm sorry, Chair, you're probably one page off, so perhaps Ms. Matthews can bring that up on screen. So page 24 of the agenda, and it's entitled Financial Highlights.
Thank you. I was going to suggest that we perhaps get it up on screen for others as well.
So I'm just going to jump around to a few pages to really highlight this here. So as the board is aware, the vast majority of our dollars flow directly from our operating budget because of the amount of students that we have. And so where the majority of the differences between last year's results and this year's results are associated with changes in FTE. So essentially we get more students, teachers, support staff, exempt staff get raises, therefore there's more expenses. Those numbers are going to change from year to year. So our story is a good one for the past five years, of course, is that we hit the trough in 2015 and have continued to increase in our FTE. Very tough this year to determine exactly where we're going to end up. But when you do review those financial documents and you notice, oh my, we spent 163 million one year and 166 million the next, it's not because we're overspending, it's because we have more students to serve and potentially more expenses associated with increased salaries. So just as a general statement, that this page here kind of guides our understanding of our year-end results. So if I then could get Ms. Matthews to turn to page 28. So page 28 is another moment, and this is not specifically associated with any financial statement outcome, but it's also a moment to reflect and to recognize the incredible amount of work that this district has achieved over the past fiscal year. And so you'll see a variety of projects funded from provincial grants, from local capital grants, from operating funds. And if you scroll through this list, and I encourage you to take a moment to look at it, and down through the next page to page 29, you just see the sheer amount of big ticket items that our school district was able to deliver to the betterment of our students, to the betterment of the environment, to the betterment of our staff. And I just wanted to recognize that because this is a moment to take stock as well. And so they're there for you to review. The last one, and again, I think probably the focus of what we're here to really dive into this evening is on page 31 of 142. And this is the high level, essentially end result of where we are at year to year, of course, but most important 2019, 2020, with respect to our operating surplus. And then, of course, with the recommendations on where to move those funds. I've got Ms. Penner here if we have questions about the capital fund, but really the focus is of the operating fund generally. And so you'll see here we have three areas that staff has suggested that should be internally restricted out of the surplus. Unrestricted funds that we will be talking about a little bit separately from the financial statements, and then finally a proposal to move additional dollars to local capital as well. So if Ms. Matthews, if you could turn to page 11 of the agenda. And in the meeting on September 2nd, we had the opportunity to go through this document relatively expediently. And so want to have the opportunity to answer questions. But here's where staff has restricted dollars that we're seeking board approval, and they've been restricted in the financial statements already. So it's a yes, we approve, or again, if the board decides that these are not appropriate restrictions, then we would need to change the financial statements. The unrestricted surplus we will talk about in just one moment. And so the highlight here, and again, I would really appreciate the work of finance staff, frankly, for making sure that we have our eyes on the policy with respect to surplus, and to make sure that we're not exceeding the ranges in place in that surplus. And if we are, we can explain why, and have a plan to address the discrepancies if we're not within the policy framework. Now, again, our policy is a board policy, so if the board chooses to go outside of its policy, it absolutely is able to do that. We're not recommending any changes to the policy at this point because, frankly, COVID has thrown so many things up in the air and explains almost exclusively why, if we are not within the range of the policy for surplus in a certain area, why we're not. So I'll go through these very briefly. And so again, on a year-to-year basis, we have a staffing contingency and we have a replacement cost or contingency. And so those numbers are there. The board budgeted.
I do have a question from one of the trustees, so I'd like to allow that question just so we don't get too far ahead. Trustee Barron.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I appreciate you allowing me to bring my question forward. I'm wondering, because I'm wondering if our Secretary Treasurer will be answering my question based on where he was going, if we could, if I could ask to have my question after we're done this slide, if that's okay with you.
Yes, you know what I'm going to do right now, actually, that's a good point, because it is always awkward interrupting presentations and information. So I'll just ask for anyone who does want to add themselves to the speakers list, maybe just indicate beside comment or question that, you know, it is in relation to what's being spoken. Otherwise, I'll assume that you're just adding your name to the queue for the end of the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you.
And through you, Madam Chair, I will pause after this slide because, again, we are also going to briefly be talking about where staff is recommending funds for the unrestricted surplus. And at this point, the unrestricted surplus does not impact the financial statements, so it's a bit of a different conversation. So changes to these restrictions, however, would change the financial statements. So we'll see the board, again, was aware that the international program was going to have an impact because of COVID. Largely, it's appearing as though the numbers that we presented in the budget year in spring are largely in line with our projections. We continue to have interest, external interest from international students, particularly for later in the year. And so if we are in a better position, we're almost assuredly to have better results than what we budgeted for. But at the same time, we don't know where COVID is going yet. And so the supplement is in place. Aboriginal education programs, I think the board has seen this number on a year-to-year basis. These are restricted funds, so these can't be reallocated by the board. But what this is that largely what will happen is the Aboriginal Education Department will expend these funds this year and get a new batch near the end of the year, and then we will carry forward. It's almost like a year's delay for this program area. COVID costs for cleaning, we put those in there the moment we knew that this was going to be an issue. These funds represent a part, but not all, of the delta, sorry, the difference between what the provincial government's return to school funding versus what our actually costs are. They will be higher. At the time of drafting, we weren't aware of the federal funds at this point, but I will say, of course, we'll be coming back to the board very soon when we have the final financial impact of all the staffing that we've just gone through, but largely to support the transition program and the loss of revenue to DL, we're looking at most of the federal funds at this point, but we don't have a final number. School supplies, so this number here is what schools carry over, a very small amount that they're able to carry over year to year, and so schools will expend these dollars along with their current year's allocations. COVID loss transferred to DL, again, this was a very early number that we were choosing, so as we noted, every student that goes to DL, we lose approximately $1,500 per student. And so we're looking at more like 600 students. And so if you can times that by 1,500, you can see the potential loss in revenue that we're going to be facing. Dual credit, we've noted that we, as a district, we had a clarification from the Ministry of Education on exactly the type of students that may well be funded for dual credit. And we relied on an interpretation that didn't quite align with that. And so in order to ensure that those students are given the programming that essentially they were promised, we set aside some funds to support that. Confined space study and fire plan, as noted, they're both requirements for health and safety programs. We're bringing those in-house to be performed by an assistant manager. COVID Q1 staffing, and so here's an example of where normally in high schools, well, in elementaries, frankly, but in high schools we have a little bit of time where we can move blocks and we can collapse classes and we can change students around in the first few weeks of school. And this is a case where we needed to create cohorts because we were very wary of trying to shift kids in and out, given the fact that the cohorts would have been built. So to ensure that we had staffing available, we made sure that secondaries had some extra blocks to be able to build those cohorts. And if the kids don't appear, there won't be funding to go with them. Curriculum learning and support funding, generally learning services, carry forward funds. Asbestos reassessments, again, this is associated with worker health and safety, and then just a minor other pot. And Ms. Matthews, if you could just scroll down and I'll complete the slide and break for a moment here. We didn't put any money in the emergency / project reserve. We could have, but given that traditionally we have not, we thought that it would make difficult year over year comparisons. And so we didn't proceed. And then again, so you'll see the internally restricted number at 3.10%, which is above the range that the policy requires. However, again, because of COVID, that's why if you took the COVID related numbers out, we'd no longer be, we'd be well within the range of the policy. And then finally, there's unrestricted surplus associated with transfers to local capital. So for instance, vehicles, if we purchase the vehicle in June and it hasn't been delivered, it ends up being an expense that we have, but unfortunately we haven't expended the dollars, so they show up as surplus. Dover Bay Power System Upgrade, it's not that we don't have the sufficient funds in the annual facilities grant and we're realizing it's at end of life. Power system upgrade for buses, we can safely now say, and we will happily promote it very soon, the district is going to be successful in receiving 2 electric buses. And in order to proceed to move our fleet to an electric system, we are going to have to provide some infrastructure upgrades. And so this goes towards our GHG emissions. But again, the reason it's here in the financial statements is because it's not something we could really not do is install these stations. And then finally, there's Dufferin renovation to support staff that are there. And normally what we do is we would put this in our annual facilities grant. And because we've moved to a system of not permanent walls, so we have some flexibility, and we don't want to be spending money at a facility that may well change again in 3, 4, how many ever years, that we've invested a small amount that again can't come out of AFG because it's equipment in making the space flexible. So ultimately that would leave an unrestricted surplus of 2.6 million, which is in the range of board policy. And then after we've talked about the financial statements, we'd like to go over some proposals for the expenditure of the unrestricted surplus.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. I'll now invite Trustee Barron back, followed by Trustee Stanley, and then Trustee Keller with some questions pertaining to this.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair to the Secretary Treasurer, I should have known that you were going to give more information. I got a little excited there to ask you a question, thinking you were moving on. So I appreciate all that additional information. Well, I was looking at the screen, but that's okay. I have it written down. I wanted to see if you could, the couple of questions that I had were around the dual credit program and the Dufferin renovations. I think you answered my question around the Dufferin renovations, but the dual credit, I'm wondering if you could clarify if this particular funding that is being requested is to meet the needs of the students that are currently in place, and if you foresee any future costs of this. Is this a one-time thing, or is this something that you foresee being an ongoing cost in the future?
So through you, Madam Chair, so this is absolutely a one-time cost, and to be clear, the 160 is probably more than required in the circumstances. We're just getting to see the uptake of the students in the various programs, but we just wanted to make sure that the number would cover it. So it is one time, absolutely, and those students some of them are in the programming now.
Did you have a follow-up, Trustee Barron?
Thank you, Chair. No follow-up.
Okay. Trustee Stanley.
Hi, thank you. I have an initial question, and then I know that there's going to be a follow-up based on this. So my initial question is with regards to the international students, I know we've been given these numbers about what the expected numbers were, and I heard that you said that prediction has seemed to be accurate. But I'm wondering, what is the percentage decrease of students this year compared to students in previous years? Do you have that?
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe Director Sutton is also available, and I'll give her a moment to maybe see if she can search that number. I believe that our initial projections were looking at about 228 FTE, and our numbers ended up around 60 or 57, which is what we budgeted, and I think we're coming in slightly more than we budgeted at this point. That's just off the top of my head, so perhaps I can turn to see if Ms. Sutton has the numbers at her fingertips now that I've delayed it just a moment.
How courteous.
Sorry, I apologize if it's dark in this room that I'm in. Through the chair, Secretary Treasurer Walsh is very close. I don't have the exact numbers on hand, but I do know that we budgeted for 67 students, and that was down from approximately 250 students last year. So we are, as I understand, on par for what we're currently seeing, and there is interest for going forward, but that will of course depend on students' ability to come.
Thank you, and I believe Stanley preempted a follow-up.
I did, although I just got another one. So I guess what I just heard is that there may be some concern about those students' ability to arrive. My follow-up.
Sorry, no, there's no concern about the students that we budgeted for are here and in their buildings.
Okay, good to know. My follow-up was, so I'm really struggling with this aspect of the surplus allocation. I know we've had this conversation, but I feel like what is different now is that it seems like we have come to accept, or at least the dialogue and narrative around COVID has changed. and that COVID is going to be here for the long haul. And that there's, I keep saying no end in sight or years or, so I know that our previous discussion about international students was really like, hey, we're gonna hold the program or support the program in hopes that, let's say by January-ish, we're able to bring those students back again. But from what I'm seeing now in the discussions of COVID, that doesn't seem like it's going to be a reality. Given this conversation about the pandemic, the no end in sight and expected at least till 2021. So I'm wondering, there's kind of a question here. It's kind of a statement. Like I'm uncomfortable with us allocating $1 million to float the program when I would rather see the money go to the students that we have here now to ensure health and safety or education needs. But what I'm wondering is that if there's any, from staff perspective, is there any change in perspective about how you feel about those previous conversations we've had about maintaining this funding, given that the dialogue and the narrative around COVID has changed to be more of a long-term perspective?
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. So the one thing that perhaps it's worthwhile to remind trustees is that $1 million isn't money just flowing to the international program. That $1 million is what staff said, we think the international program is going to come back. So we don't, number one, we don't want to cut the program supports because it can't come back if you cut them. So that's only a small proportion of that $1 million. The rest of it is and I know it's a little hard sometimes to describe it, but the rest of it is actually, so we didn't cut $600,000 or so, and perhaps Ms. Sutton can help me with that number, and we can come back with that exact number, but we didn't cut from our actual programming. So the money that's subsidizing the rest of the system through the international program, the part of that $1 million is exactly that. So it's us saying, let's assume that the international program is going to come back. So rather than, lower our staffing ratios across the system to make up for the lost revenue on a permanent basis, we'll access our surplus on a one-time basis so we don't actually have to make a cut to the system. And then a big chunk of that $1 million, but not the majority, is actually for the staffing associated with the international program, because the students, the 60 students, do bring in revenue still, and so they largely pay for many of the overhead costs of the ISE program. It's the money on top, the money that was the profit, so to speak, to the system, that what we've said is we're going to do that. So if we took that $1 million and said, okay, we're no longer going to use that funds for the ISE supplement, essentially we would then be required to go cut our programming. So it's a bit of a part of it's a little bit of the shell, and we can get you those numbers from previous presentations. I just don't have them at the top of my head.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. I'd ask Trustee Stanley, you've had a couple of follow-ups now, but if there's something you needed clarified there, otherwise I'm going to move on to the next speaker.
No, just that the offer from the Secretary Treasurer Walsh about those numbers would be useful. I do remember this conversation, so I can't remember that. So that would be great at a later point in time.
Great, and maybe I'd just add that based off of the demand that we're seeing from international students, and some of them are seeking online options so they can do part of the year online and then come into the system, shows that the demand is not slowing down for Canada, and the demand is not slowing down for our school district. Of course, if the borders don't ever open, we're in the same boat, but it hasn't lessened demand to be here.
Thank you.
Interesting, the online aspect of that as well. So I hadn't really contemplated that. Okay, the next question is from Trustee Keller.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question that is not related to this particular topic, and I know there's other trustees who have some burning questions about the international program. So would you like me to hold off for now, or do you like me to ask the question?
Well, Trustee Keller, I only see one other speaker listed here, and that's Trustee Higginson. So I'll ask Trustee Higginson, is this in relation to the international program?
Yes, my question is about international.
Okay. So thank you, Trustee Keller. We'll come back to you. Trustee Higginson?
Thank you. Thanks, Trustee Keller. I appreciate it. It helps us with the continuity of the questions. So what I heard was that we have 67 international students. I also heard through the, like, I know this is complicated, but that a large chunk of that million, just over $1 million, is actually the lost revenue that we're allocating surplus to. Okay, so what I also remember is of those 67 students, when we talked about this in June, was that about 2/3 of them were not in homestay. Only about 25 were homestay. And what I also remember was that we did talk about that we would come back to have a conversation as a board about the allocation of funds towards supporting the staffing for this once we had a better understanding, and whether there was going to be a need to continue to allocate all that staffing and continue to keep the number of staffing that we had in the international ed program. So my question is, do we have the ability still to have that conversation, knowing, as Trustee Stanley has pointed out, that the look is much more long-term now in terms of border closures for COVID? And if so, when do we have the opportunity to have that conversation?
Sure. So, through you, Madam Chair, what I would say is, for the purposes of the financial statements, it aligns with the budget passage that the board had. So I wouldn't recommend aligning that conversation with the supplement as the way that it's presented. If the board is interested in that discussion, I think probably the beginning in camera, because obviously we're talking about a relatively small amount of folks. And then of course the general program discussion could happen. So if the board does agree to this restriction that was part of the budget, there's nothing that would prevent later from changing these restricted items if the funds have yet to be expended. So I guess what I would say is, for the purposes of the financial statements, we would recommend approving it, because that supports what the board's budget that was passed. And if there's further discussions to be had, they would come about the program in a general fashion. They would come in camera. And ultimately, if the board ever had a change that impacted this year's budget, it could still happen as long as the funds are not expended.
Can I have my follow-up?
Sorry, yes, you can, Trustee Higginson.
Okay. So I guess, we did pass the budget, and I remember a lot of conversation about this. And so I'm wondering, and we talked about this, revisiting this in September. So I would like to request that we do revisit that as a board, and that the appropriate time be set aside in terms of the allocation of our surplus and the amount of money we're allocating towards that. So I'd like to make that request for a few, and if it has to be in camera because of the small number, then I understand, although we have talked about staffing positions, small number of staffing positions in the past in open meetings, and I think about the community schools coordinator positions that we talked about as an example. So if it's the board's wish for it to start and close, then I understand that, but I do think that I would like to revisit the allocation of this amount of surplus. That's it. Thank you.
So that I've made a note of that. I'm sure that's noted. Don't know that we need to formalize that request at this point in time. I'm going to go through the rest of the speakers list. Trustee Keller.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So I'm going to change the topic a little bit, if that's okay. And I have a question to staff. We have an approved motion that we were going to discuss at tonight's meeting, but because we had a very busy agenda, we weren't able to accommodate at this meeting, and that's the discussion around AEDs. And I'm just curious to know how the allocation, if the board was to want to explore that as an option, how the allocation could be used to achieve that.
Through you, Madam Chair. So what I would say is that, again, this the document that we just reviewed on page 11 is the financial statements. What I would recommend is the best way to do that, number one, of course, would be the board supported AEDs. There's kind of two beginning costs. One is capital, and then some training costs, etc. And then one would be to build it into the budget. So the ongoing maintenance costs of the AEDs, this isn't the discussion for that, I would suggest. With respect to the financial statement, I wouldn't recommend that it be part of the financial statement discussion with the surplus, but it's the next conversation that we'll have once we've done with the financial statement. So immediately after, we're going to talk about the staff recommendations for the unallocated surplus. I would suggest that it's the unallocated surplus that would be the appropriate place, if that was a priority of the board, to look at those funds to support AED kind of initial capital outlay, staff training, and then of course we would have to incorporate it into the budget. So I would say it's the unallocated, not the current restrictions that are present in the financial statements.
Thank you for that clarification and guidance. As Trustee Keller said, that's something that will be on a future agenda. So Trustee Stanley has a question next.
I do, and I hope that this is allows us to transition into what I think is the next intended topic, is about the unrestricted operating surplus. I'm seeking more historical information from perhaps staff members or trustees who have more of a historical perspective. And it's more of a philosophical nature. I'm wondering if this board has had previous discussions and or made any decisions about the principle of transferring funds from operating, so in an unrestricted operating surplus, to local or to capital purposes. I'm just curious if there's been that kind of conversation of moving funds that are, from an operating perspective to that. Well, I'm repeating myself now, to buildings and capital. I'm just wondering. I'll leave it there actually to see if there has been this historical perspective. Thanks.
Would you like me to respond, Chair, to begin with, or?
Yes, please. I'm not going to be able to shed much historical light on this.
So what I can say is that it's a fairly regular occurrence generally, and in fact, I mean, obviously I'm new, so we can turn it over to someone with a bit more of a history. Certainly, we did that in the process of the budgeting to support technology expansion in our schools, and those funds in local capital, I can only assume in previous years emanated from our operating surplus, but perhaps I could ask Ms. Sutton if she could provide a little bit more background on previous transfers, if any.
Yes, through the chair. Generally speaking, each budget year we have needs of a capital nature that are for items that are transferred over from the operating to the local capital. Generally, those include our technology plan and any major purchases that are for capital items, because ministry does not fund a lot of those pieces. They fund large capital projects per our 5-year capital plan, but things that we see that are emergent, those are funded from our operating dollars, and the only source of local capital that we have is either available land sales or operating dollars that we transfer over. So it's a continuous ongoing scenario in a budget season or in the financials where there are items that are identified and then that transfer is brought forward and subsequently approved and then put into the budget or altered, whatever that might look like.
And I would add that in the case, for instance, of the vehicles that you're seeing there, that number is probably significantly higher than in previous years, just due to supply chain issues and delivery times. And so that money would have most years have been expended and not appear as it does here as a local capital transfer. It would have just been purchased during the year, but there's an example of probably a discrepancy from year to year.
Thank you. Trustee Stanley, did you have a follow-up?
I do. So it's more, I mean, I understand. So this is a really tough issue, right? Because I know that capital is underfunded, and I hear Ms. Sutton's justification for that. I struggle with that because, you know, from an operating fund perspective, you know, we're usually talking more about student achievement. Well, from a learning perspective. So I'm torn, and I'm wondering, maybe just putting out there, my follow-up is to say, hey, maybe this board wants to consider a discussion around this, whether it be a policy perspective, much like we have on the other aspects or not. It's a challenging one, you know, practical realities versus philosophical. So I just would put out there that maybe this board wants to consider that conversation at some point in time. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Stanley. I see Trustee Higginson has a comment.
Thanks. Just on Trustee Stanley's point from a historical governance perspective, that the board has had these conversations in the past, particularly around when we were developing the surplus policy, and you know, also made some changes to our oversight in the financial oversight in implementing the quarterly reports in order to ensure that, you know, that money is money that is, you know, allocated for operational expenses. But we also became aware that sometimes you don't, for unforeseen reasons, such as unfilled staffing positions, et cetera, there's money left at the end of the year, despite how hard you try. And one of the things that we implemented in order to ensure that we were spending as much of our operational money as we possibly could, especially once we got past the point of being in deficit budgets, was to have those quarterly reports to make sure that we were staying on top of it and trying to change behavior from trying to save all of our money from being in a time of declining enrollment to making sure that we were spending all of our money in the year that it was allocated as best we possibly could by having those quarterly reports and ensuring that we were staying on top of the unspent money. So the board did historically have the conversation and did try to implement some governance processes to ensure that that operational money was being spent as soundly as possible during the year that it was intended for.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Higginson. Secretary Treasurer Walsh, you were so still there, I wasn't sure if the screen had frozen. So, so back over to you for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, sure, and I'm sure the superintendent will jump in as required. But so in addition to, again, what we see with respect to the financial statements with the restricted numbers, we do have a number of proposals. Staff has a number of proposals with respect to the use of the unrestricted surplus of $2,600,011, or sorry, $2,611,473. And at the get-go, one of the things that I want to point out is that there's a number of recommendations in here. They're all intended to recognize the board's goals and meets the board's goals. They're also obviously intended to, the staff believes that they're incredibly important items to be put forward to meet those goals. But you will notice that there's a little bit of a theme in the sense that some of them aren't necessarily all immediate spends. And so what I mean by that is I mentioned the federal dollars and the expense of some of the startup programming and the shift to DL, the loss in revenue, etc. That was brought to the board's attention. So we're still trying to find out and see exactly where our numbers are going to lie from an operating budget perspective. So we're making these proposals, and a few of them, if we get to December, we would have the ability to revamp or relook at them and say, okay, well, maybe we better make sure that we're well prepared for next year. So because we see, you know, a permanent loss of kids to DL, or we see something along that lines. And so some of these, and some of them are capital in nature, could be shifted back. And so I want to preface some of the recommendations with that. So often what we would do is come to September and say, okay, well, look, we think this program is really important. And then we'd staff it and we'd proceed with it. But again, given the unknown nature of COVID, given the fact that we're already, you know, to Trustee Higginson's point, you know, confident that we're going to be able to staff and have TTOCs, but you know, increasing numbers even more than that might put additional strain on the system. So you don't see a ton of additional program requirements in that regard. So I just very quickly will run through the 10 items that staff would like to recommend, and I know there's probably a million questions about them all, but so first of all is $750,000 for the Equitable Access to Technology program.
Mark, oh, sorry, Secretary Treasurer, can we either get this up on the screen or can you bring us to the page in the agenda package just so
Karen, could you put up the page?
There we
go.
go.
So
thank you.
So Equitable Access to Technology program, and so staff and I have been discussing a way to separate the Wi-Fi program from the actual just technology program, and so this is associated with Wi-Fi in schools. So we've got our program moving quickly. We've got our in-house staff doing a great job. Barsby is done. I'm not sure where they're at right now. We're going to be sending some folks over to Woodlands. We're looking at what the service for a variety of schools is going to be, but we know the project is significantly undercapitalized. So we want to continue to be able to support this program and to get schools on an equitable footing so technology is accessible for everyone. Second, Hulkaminum support program, and I'm not sure if the superintendent wants to, if I wait for questions or to speak about this for a moment.
I do see that Trustee Keller has a question, so I'll invite Trustee Keller to speak.
Thank you. Through the chair, to Secretary Treasurer Walsh, sorry, I'm a bit tongue-tied this evening. So I just want to go back to my previous question around AEDs, just because that's come to mind, but there may be some other items as well. So in relation to staff recommendations for the unrestricted surplus, is that where these types of projects could potentially have an amount?
Through you, Madam Chair. So yes, that I think that would be the appropriate place if they had an initial capital outlay, and then of course in the case of you know, an ongoing maintenance requirements, then we'd be finding budget for it as well. But that would be the appropriate place. So yeah, yes.
May I have a follow-up?
Yes.
So just as a request, I mean, I would like to see an amount set aside using our unrestricted surplus for the capital investment for AEDs to support our future discussion. And then in the event that the board does not approve it, then we would have a discussion around how to best reallocate that amount. The rationale I'm basing this comment on is I'd rather see us allocate an amount with the surplus that we have now than to wait until we go into our next budget cycle.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Trustee Keller. I'll go back to the Secretary Treasurer at this point to go through the rest of the recommendations.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair, and we'll ensure that the cost is accessible as well. we'll send that out.
If I just may as well, I guess if you could explain to me, I mean, my understanding is that, you know, as far as informed decisions, we do anticipate that we will be having at future meetings discussions specific to this topic. And at that time, we would be able to set aside those monies, just to be really clear here.
So through you, Madam Chair, so what we would do is find, if the board said, please spend this money at a later meeting, we would come back to the board and say, okay, here's where we're recommending that those funds are reallocated from. So it'd likely be one of these.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so 200.
I was going to, sorry to interject. Could I speak to the Hulkaminum support program?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So there's an allocation of $200,000 to what we're calling a Hulkaminum support program. The idea behind this is it's becoming increasingly impossible to hire staff members who can speak Hulkaminum or teach the Hulkaminum language. So I've been talking with the CAO of Snuneymuxw First Nation, Joan Brown, and along with the Director of Instruction of Indigenous Learning, Ted Cadwallader. We've been talking about building a perhaps an online platform or program, a multimedia-rich program, where students could learn the Hulkaminum language without the same sorts of resources that require someone to be in a classroom and being able to speak the language. So we're exploring these options with SFN, and we will include our other knowledge partners to explore further opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Superintendent Sewell.
So the environment, through you, Madam Chair, the environmental upgrade proposal, I mean, I think that the board has made it very clear that environmental sustainability is at the forefront of its goals. And so here's examples that not only will save us money, and so we're also thinking about in a number of these proposals that they would have a future positive impact on our operating budget, but also lower GHG emissions. So we wanted to propose this. You won't see deep planning documents associated with these, with the proposal, because we didn't want to spend a great deal of time and energy if the board wasn't supportive of this direction. But there's a number of potential suggestions here, and we know that our boiler program is behind. We know that we're continuing to upgrade a variety of facilities that will have immediate impacts. We're talking, 30% reductions in GHG and immediately in some of the cases here. And so that's the thinking behind this, and we would report back to the board on the exact expenditures.
Thank you. We do have a question specific to this this number on environmental upgrades, Secretary Treasurer. So I'll invite Trustee Barron with her question.
Thank you, Chair. Through to the Secretary Treasurer. Thanks for your information around this environmental upgrades section of the ask from staff there. I'm trying to understand, because I know we're going to be talking about the long range facilities later on in this meeting, and I'm listening to these asks by staff, and I'm of course trying to link together what has come from the results of the long range facilities survey that went out and how they interconnect to these asks on here. And one thing in particular that comes to mind right away, and I know we can get into this later, but I'm curious around this specific point. I know that there was, over 50% of the respondents were talking about the importance of learning gardens and land-based learning or land-based education. I can't remember the exact term that was used in there, but along the lines of these environmental upgrades section, I'm wondering, I notice you have and other opportunities, which is quite broad. I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit around whether those type of learning opportunities would be considered in that category of other opportunities.
Through you, Madam Chair. So I think the answer for this bullet was no, that's not what was anticipated. The intention was GHG reduction to meet the board's goals. Certainly, that wouldn't preclude the board from going that direction. So outdoor learning spaces, etc. But this was definitely focused on the proposal as it stands is focused on emissions in our schools.
Thank you. Was there a follow-up to that, Trustee Barron?
No, that answers my question, and I look forward to us digging a little bit more into that later. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And I'm going to invite Trustee Higginson. I see Trustee McKay on the speakers list for when we get to the end of the surplus presentation. So Trustee Higginson, is it a good time for you to ask your question?
Sure. Because I know photocopier upgrades and internal paint programs are super sexy and we all want to talk about them. No offense, Mr. Sabo. Okay, so I just want to make sure, and I'm sorry for the silly questions on math and stuff, but we all know this is not my strong suit. So when I add up all of these things, I come up with the total amount of unrestricted surplus at all these numbers 1 to 10 add up to the same number as what's at the bottom of the chart as leftover for total unrestricted surplus on the bottom of page 11. And I'm okay spending the money. That's, I think, what it's there to do. But I just want to make sure that what we've also done in the internally restricted is left ourselves enough money for the just in cases because of the just in cases of this year and how bizarre it is. And I know there's also federal funding and then there's the provincial and there's all these things that are elsewhere. But those aside, in a normal year, making sure that spending all of our total unrestricted surplus does leave us with enough money, because I think we've done it through our surplus policy, we've allocated it. I just want to be clear on that.
So through you, Madam Chair. So the answer is that we are confident that it does. So again, when we look at the document with respect to the restrictions, we have staffing contingency, replacement cost contingency, COVID staffing costs, which some of them may fit under the federal dollars, revenue loss, some of that will fit under the federal dollars. And as noted, some of these projects certainly are chosen with an eye to, if we did get into a certain area of concern, that we may be able to come back and review these and change course. And so the Equitable Access to Technology program is a perfect example, just as the board probably typically doesn't transfer from local capital to operating, but here's an example of where they could. The other point that I think that's important, and we're about to get to it here when we talk about Dover, is that we may well be asked for more of a contribution to the Dover project from Treasury Board. And so what we want to do is make sure that every penny in our system is accounted for a project that matches a board goal that's going to improve student outcomes, that's going to meet the board's goals of being environmental stewards, that's going to cut down on our long-term costs to hopefully, when we get into lean years, if indeed COVID budget balancing is required in future years. And so that's a little bit of a strategic reason to bring that number down to 0 as well, because we are going to be asked to contribute likely more than 250,000. We don't think we should. But certainly we want to be able to make the case transparently that every penny is spoken for.
Any follow-up, Trustee Higginson?
No, thanks. Thank you.
Okay. And I just would like to request if you can scroll up a bit on this screen here. This is the page that I happen to be missing. Secretary Treasurer, I'll pass it over to you again to just continue on.
Sure, so we can scroll down again to the photocopier upgrade. And so what we're looking at here is what we would like to do is get a proof of concept. And so we as a school district have a lot of single-use photocopiers, a lot. And those have both operating cost, They have a maintenance cost. Their cost per piece of paper is exorbitantly higher than a centralized photocopier system. And the ink is more expensive, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we've seen is, interestingly enough, one of the savings that we had year to year, of course, is school supplies, and we haven't broken that out at this time yet to see exactly what the paper cost of that is. But we know that if we can streamline this in a way that is still accessible to our staff, there's going to be savings centrally from an electricity perspective, centrally from a capital perspective, and at the school level, they will be able to keep their savings on the lessened amount of paper. The 200,000 is to get the program rolling, and again, proof of concept in probably a small, medium, and a large school. But we're very confident that the payback on such a program will be, again, relatively fast. The internal paint program, this is an issue that we've heard, I think, on a regular basis about how we're on a 52-year paint schedule, so you're quicker to get your school replaced than you are to get your school painted in some cases. And we want to make a statement about, you know, that folks can be proud of their schools and that the board is reinvesting in them in a way, and we think that this is a decent amount. Potentially spent over 2 years, perhaps 1 if we really want to get going. Dover Bay expansion, to my point that I mentioned earlier, Treasury Board is going to require a contribution. You'll see our contribution to Hammond Bay is quite significant. And we want to recognize that, yes, Dover is a priority. Yes, we want more space. And yes, we will contribute, but at the same time, we need to be able to use our money to support board goals, and that's what the money is there for. The fact that we do have a little bit more of an unrestricted than we normally would is COVID related, and we are using those funds. Teacher mentorship and professional development. I'm not sure if the superintendent wants to pop in for a moment again.
Yeah, thank you. Just to say that we're in interesting times, and particularly at secondary, we've moved from a semester system to a quarter-mester system. And so I think we could imagine all manner of learning opportunities for teachers as we embrace the COVID era and our smoke-filled era as well, and to provide some mentorship for teachers around their professional development. Thank you.
Thanks. And then the WorkSafe program, and what the WorkSafe program, and again, we're exploring this at this point. We wanted to put it to the board to see if it's supportive, is the idea that we know that when our staff leave, so when our staff hurt themselves or when our staff are unable to work because of injuries at the workplace, the longer they are gone, the more likely they're going to be gone for a longer time, or reorienting them to the system is going to be difficult. And so typically what happens is if a worker gets injured, WorkSafe will pay for them to be home, or a proportion of it. And then what will happen is the school district's called experience rating will go up. And every time the experience rating of the school district goes up, our costs, our operating dollar costs go up. And what we would like to do is see if we can't come up with a program, and it won't apply to all workers. I want to be clear, if you can't work at all, you wouldn't be expected to. But if there's a way that we can keep our workers connected through supernumerary work, through accommodations of some type that may be slightly different than their normal work, to keep them connected, and ultimately, in 2 years' time, when finally that experience rating would catch up, when we theoretically will be needing the operating cost savings, we would see them there. So this isn't an attendance support program or anything like that. This is strictly associated with WorkSafe and keeping employees connected to the district. And then number 9 is additional staffing contingency. And to Trustee Higginson's earlier point, here is funds that would be available additional above what we've already set aside to address the rainy day, the unknown at this point, given the various programs and given the issue of COVID. And so just a little bit more set aside in that regard. And then finally, school site acquisition consultant. We have reached out to our local governments to start the process of getting a school site acquisition charge in place. I would say we've had very positive discussions. We're already on to stage 2 in some cases about what that looks like. And as we know, we're seeking expansion at Departure Bay. We're seeing full schools in many parts of Nanaimo municipality proper, more than some of the outlying areas or the other areas. Ladysmith, maybe, maybe not. But what we need to do in order to get that site acquisition charge put in place is we need to get the municipality and or regional districts to agree with our numbers. And we think that bringing in a consultant for that purpose will speed it along, because we've seen Nanaimo's numbers and the municipality itself, if they meet their targets in the next 10 years, if we had a school site acquisition charge in place, we would be getting about $1 million. And so we want to get this work done quickly and not miss out on the building boom that's happening, so we can acquire either additional sites or expansions to sites, so there's appropriate grounds to support the expanded school. So that's the purpose of those funds. So ultimately, what we're hoping to do is answer any questions that the board may have tonight, and then ultimately make the recommendation at the next board meeting. I will say that again, these are not necessarily attached directly, or they're not attached to the financial statements. So the pressure to make these decisions is not on the board, in the sense that if it wasn't made on the 23rd, we could go further. My due caution though is that if we are not able to show Treasury Board where we are using our funds, there may be increased pressure to fund additional contribution to Dover, and frankly, even with the funds allocated, the same pressure may apply.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Treasurer, and yeah, it's a fair bit to take in. I do appreciate its information. So if I'm hearing that correctly, there'll be opportunity to come back to this, and quite honestly at our next meeting. I'm going to go back to Trustee or Chair McKay, and then I have Trustee Barron, who has a question as well. So Chair McKay.
Thank you. So I guess I just wanted to express where I'm at with these allocations. I think that there was a lot of thought put into them. Well, I know that. I shouldn't say I think that. I know that. But I would like to highlight a couple of them that I think really hit home for me as important, while they're not the top spends, for example. What stands out to me first is that in our budget process in the spring, we heard from our NDTA stakeholders, our partners there, saying that they were looking for some mentorship funds to be set aside in our budget process, and we were, given COVID times, we didn't make a lot of changes in our budget, so I appreciate that we've allocated those funds at this time while we have them available. And then looking into our internal payment program, that again, it's not a large amount of money, but at the same time, it's one of those things that we've talked about with our QP stakeholders for as long as I've been around, and I'm happy to see us be able to invest some dollars in that as well. And then lastly, the Hull Communum Support Program. Participating in and hearing the stories of how far this district has come since the 1970s through our journey of reconciliation and working with our Indigenous partners. I think that this wholeheartedly supports the journey that we continue to be on, and I think it supports what we heard in the spring when we gathered many of our elders and our Indigenous knowledge keepers throughout the district, and they shared with us what was important, and we heard loudly and clearly that day that
Supporting the Hulkaminam language revitalization was very important to them, and a huge component of where we have the ability to affect a difference in walking in our path on reconciliation. So I want to say thank you to staff for bringing forward those particular recommendations within the surplus policy, and I look forward to further discussion, whether it be today or at other meetings. Hejka.
Trustee Barron.
Yes, thank you. I feel like that was a really good wrap up there, and I'm going to disrupt the flow with a couple of questions. Thanks for those great comments to Chair McKay there. I had a general quick question and then a specific question around this, but I'm wondering through our chair to the Secretary Treasurer, I know you did clarify this at a previous meeting. I apologize, I didn't write down your answer, but I do think it is important for us to clarify. On page 8 of 142, you make there's a statement in here that says that we'll receive 2.6 million in September 2020 and a further allocation in January 2020. And I was just wondering if you could please clarify what specifically you mean by that. And I did have a follow-up question as well.
So through you, Madam Chair. So that is the additional federal funding that we are anticipating to receive. So to be clear, we haven't seen the funds, exactly what that'll look like in January, but we anticipate that we'll receive 2.6 and 2.6. And so as noted in the superintendent's startup presentation, as we start to do the math on all the additional supports for DL, for the transition program, for increased supervision, for increased cleaning, we're quickly coming to the point where we're looking like all of those federal funds may end up having to go to just even the things that we've already expended dollars on or anticipate expending dollars on. For instance, the additional cost of putting the buses on Gabriola for safety reasons. So that is there to support COVID-related expenses, and we anticipate that it should get close to covering it. But again, until we get our final enrollment numbers and final moves to DL, we're not in a position to say one way or the other whether it's absolutely enough, close to enough, or even more than enough.
Follow-up, Trustee Barron?
Yes, thank you for the clarification. And actually, you know, it is a bit of a stretch to say it's a follow-up. It's pretty much a separate question. So I'm wondering if you want to put myself back on the list or if I can ask it now.
Well, it's your lucky night because you're the only one on the list right now.
Great. Thank you, Chair. My question is specifically to the internal paint program funding ask in here. I'm wondering if we have the internal QP staff capacity to take on the work that would be funded through this ask.
Sure. So I can perhaps respond, and then if Mr. Sabo wants to add to it. Well, what I can say is that we currently do have internal Red Seal painters able to perform this work. Whether the 100,000 would be to support an individual position over 2 years or to hire, for instance, a second position, that would be something that Mr. Sabo would determine with his department. But perhaps he has an additional comment.
I think, thank you for that, Secretary Treasurer Walsh. Just an additional comment, and that is finding Red Seal painters has been more of a challenge, and so finding them and having them on casual and trying to support them to continue to work with the district is important for succession planning. We are looking at other mechanisms or other ways of potentially continuing our interior painting program, given that trades painters are becoming a rare breed. Thank you.
Okay. Since that was a new question, Trustee Barron, you're also allowed a follow-up.
I think that does answer my question. I'm sure that staff is doing all they can to try to hire internally prior to looking for options outside of existing staff. And so I guess I just wanted to ask that question to understand that process a little bit more, and thanks for the clarification.
Sure, maybe. So what this will do is that if we had a casual, so someone we know we can't keep forever, so they're not continuing, we hire them as a casual, this will allow us to say, we know you're going to be working for X number of months, whatever that time period is, put your resume away.
Mr. Sabo, you had something to add to that?
Perhaps I could just add that the use of this funding for the interior paint program is intended to utilize internal forces and not look to augment our staff at this time. In other words, we'd be looking to do it with internal hires and not by contract.
Thank you very much. Clarification.
Trustee McKay.
Thank you.
You had a question?
On this line, since it's on topic, I'm curious if we have the capacity to apprentice in-house and create more trades in painting.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps through you, Madam Chair, so I would say that Mr. Sabo and I have just begun that discussion about what that could look like and exploring other school districts and other organizations that have gone down that path. So perhaps Mr. Sabo has additional information, but I would say that we're right at the start of our discussions.
That would be the essence of my response as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great to hear.
Oh, and sorry, may I add something, Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Sabo, when Mr. Sabo is on screen, you'll see the picture behind Mr. Sabo is our internal forces building childcare units. And so that's the type of internal resources that we are trying to bring to bear. And so that's the exact type of project that would really support the idea of an apprenticeship program, because we know we would actually have work for these folks for a longer period of time. So there's a good use of teams. Thank you, Mr. Sabo.
A live example, if you will. Thank you. So I see no further questions. So thank you again for bringing this information forward to us. Did you have any wrap-up comments on this item, Secretary Treasurer?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate with respect to the financial statements that any changes that if the board was going to contemplate any changes, we would need to, not to the proposed use of the unallocated surplus, but to the financial statements and any of the restricted numbers in there. We're going to be very pressed to get our financial statements finalized in time. And so certainly if there's going to be, motions to make a change, if there was, we would love to have that in mind, and certainly because we would need to move very quickly. So again, if after the financial statements have been passed, the board decides that it wants to relook at some of the funds and they haven't been expended, completely available to them. But I just really want to highlight that we are going to be on a very tight timeline after the 23rd to make changes to the financial statements themselves.
Okay. So maybe with that, then I'll open up for, any final sort of questions or comments on this before we move on after hearing what Secretary Treasurer Walsh has stated. Trustee Stanley.
Sorry, my button clicks are slow. I just want to kind of address one thing that has not been addressed, which is the question about going above policy or outside of our policy with regards to, I believe it's the internal restricted. And just to say that personally, I'm okay with that. I understand that we are in unusual circumstance, or at least new. I should call them novel circumstance, because it's not going to become unusual. But for this year, I'm in favor of going outside of our policy for that. The only thing that I wish potentially would be different would be that the Trustee Barron brought up the issue of like gardens, or it's more like the educational aspect of the board goals. I love that the GHG reductions in there, and yes, photocopier upgrades are indeed sexy. So, you know, overall, I'm in favor of that. It's just more that I wish there was more of that educational aspect of those board goals and how we can create that excitement for, you know, students in our schools to embrace the goals as well. So just wanted to communicate that, you know, overall, notwithstanding the international student stuff, which I will just fight with myself, I understand that we are going above range, and I am in favor of the argument in support of that. So just wanted to communicate that since it had not even been addressed in this meeting.
Trustee Higginson.
Thanks. Just wrapping up my thoughts on this, that it's really hard. I've found it really difficult tonight keeping track of the fact that we have the federal funds and the provincial grants, and then we have our surplus, and that this conversation is really focused on the allocation of our surplus, and that some of those other issues or ideas, not issues, ideas that were brought up by other members of the board, you know, gardens and outdoor learning spaces. I look forward to seeing if there's a way to have those educational capital projects become part of the spending of the federal grants as a way for us to have some kind of capital legacy as a result of this really crappy situation that we find ourselves in. So, you know, making something out of that money that is not only going to be good for learning and create a healthier and safer learning environments during COVID, but may also be something that, you know, like gardens or outdoor learning spaces that remains with our district after this, hopefully after this passes. So it's been tricky keeping those glomps of money separate tonight, but this was focused solely on the allocation of surplus, and I look forward to the discussions about those other grants. So thank you.
Thank you all. I don't see any further comment on that, so I'm going to move on to the next agenda item, which is again item 8.3. Welcome back, Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll bring the board's attention to the recommended motion on page 97. This report, the exempt compensation report, is a requirement for us to do, and I think we've probably seen this on a regular basis. The information is there, and subject to questions, the recommended motion is available to you.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just, I see that has been moved by Trustee Higginson and seconded by Trustee Brezovich. Okay, so I'll now open it up for any discussion on the recommendation on the motion. Trustee Barron.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions tonight. Through the chair, to our Secretary Treasurer, I have to admit I have Trustee Higginson's words running through my head because I know she's brought this up multiple times since I've been a trustee. And I'm noticing something that stands out to me is the vacation payout. And I'm wondering, just to clarify, I couldn't see in there a section that differentiated if any vacation was actually taken. Is that all I just wanted to, if I could say my words properly, what I'm trying to say is, could you please clarify that section? Does that encompass all the vacation, or maybe could you break that down a little bit for me?
Sure, through Madam Chair. So the base salary of all exempt folks includes entitlement to vacation days, and so where they've taken the vacation days, you won't see that breakdown. It's only where the vacation days were not taken in the appropriate period of time and that the payout has occurred. So you wouldn't see, so if an individual had 2 weeks of holidays, took 1 week and couldn't take the other and cashed it out, you wouldn't see the one that they've taken. You'd only see the one that was cashed out.
So could I have a follow-up, please, Chair?
Yes, you may. Thank you. I'm just rifling through paper here.
And so am I reading these documents properly to show that for the most part, our senior staff were unable to take many vacation days that were allotted to them?
Through you, Madam Chair. So I would say that yes, that comment is correct. There's a bit of a difficulty accessing the days. And I will say that generally you're just seeing a limited number of folks associated with the district in exempt world here, but it's been a bit of an issue generally, and we've been working on it quite hard over the past 4.5 months to catch up on our vacation. I think the report will look better next year, despite COVID, frankly. But yes, there's certainly an issue. I imagine there's not many days the superintendent can barely get away during COVID and various other issues. So yes, there's some holidays, but not as many as that should be taken.
Thank you. Just to clarify, my comment is not a criticism. I know we're in COVID times and appreciate our staff work really, really hard. I do think, though, there is a theme of vacation time not being able to be taken. And so definitely I'm happy to hear that those conversations are happening to try to ensure that our staff's health and wellness is taken into consideration and is a priority. Thanks.
Work-life balance. I see no other questions on this. I realize I didn't actually read the recommendation. I see it's up there. The recommendation's been moved and seconded. So I'll now just ask if there's any opposition. Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Secretary Treasurer Walsh. I'm just, sorry, I have so much paper in front of me here. Correspondence referred from the regular board meeting. I see none. Unfinished business, so item 10 on your agendas. Welcome back, Secretary Treasurer Walsh, to introduce, and I think you probably have a partner in this, on the long range facility plan thought exchange feedback themes.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Dale, do you want to kick us off, or do you want me to start? Oh,
and sorry, I just have to, I'm getting a notice here that I need to call the question on the last recommendation. Oh, yeah, there were no objections, so that passed unanimously. Thank you. And back to you, Dale and Secretary Treasurer.
I think Secretary Treasurer Walsh should maybe just kick it off, and then I can take the engagement piece, and then I'll throw it back to him if I may, Chair.
Sure. So thank you so much, and Mr. Burgos will go over a little bit of the results, and perhaps what I'd like to go over is what staff's recommendations for next steps are once trustees are satisfied with questions. And so what staff is proposing is that we take away these results, the comments that we've received, that you've seen, as well as the board's goals and that work that we're starting to do, particularly with our enrollment, and go away and start drafting a plan to be able to bring back to the board. So it gives us a document that we've got a good starting place that reflects community input, that reflects board goals and reflects our enrollment and facilities reality. And then that'll really focus, I think, or we think that the board's commentary back to us, and then ultimately the consultation with our community on the plan itself. And so given we've got this information back, which Mr. Burgos will go over in a high level in a moment, that's what we're proposing as the next direction. You'll notice that the recommended motion says to bring back that draft in the fall. So we're not saying necessarily October. December can be fall in some places, I think, right? But we really want to make it a priority, and we really want to get a document to be able to focus what the next steps will be to get this document done, because it's pretty darn important. And now we've heard from our stakeholders for the first time, not the last time, but we think we have the information we need to start proceeding. So maybe if Mr. Burgos wants to highlight what we heard.
Yes. Of course, my microphone's off. I'm not used to turning it on for the meeting. All right, let's start that again. The survey that was put out on July the 6th remained open until September 4. There were 19 questions in that survey, and in total, we received 805 respondents. If I may, I'm going to throw up on the screen here. Ms. Matthews has it ready to go, so I will put on the beginnings of this survey here. Give me one moment. I'm just going to do double duty here. Okay, so for the people at home now, you can see the survey and some of the results. Now, the survey is 97 pages long. I'm hoping that I can go page by page tonight and line by line. Chair O'Neill is shaking her head no. So I'm going to continue with the high level plan here. In total, like I had mentioned, 805 recipients. It took them about 11 minutes, and questions 15 and 19 were open-ended responses, not the only ones, but those of were significance. And I wanted to point those out is if people wanted to take a moment when they go through this agenda, there's a link to the survey, and you can see the full 97-page survey. There are a lot of great comments. Of course, I can't speak to all of them tonight. However, I'm going to try and just go high level on pretty much all of the important pieces that we feel were in this survey. So Ms. Matthews, you are on the first page, and from the looks of it, that looks like the question is, what is your connection to schools and NLPS? Of course, biggest number here, and always as expected, just under 89% are parent, guardian, or caregivers. Those are the ones who participated in this survey. If I can get Ms. Matthews to scroll on to the next page. The next question is, do you or your child or students, so of course we had this open for students to answer as well, so that's why the wording is the way that it is, attend an NLPS school, and so on and so forth down the list. The highest rated response was attending an NLPS school. So whether it was a student or a parent of a student in the district, those are the people that responded to most in the survey. The next question that we have in the highlight here is, do you or your child or student attend your or their catchment school? And the majority is at 73% or just under 73% saying yes. So again, the majority of people that took part in this survey are directly associated with the district. The next question, keep scrolling down, or I believe you're there already. Are you or is your child student enrolled in a district program? The answers options were yes, no, or I'm not aware, and the majority of the answers went to no. I am or my child's student is not enrolled in a district program. That was just under 70%. The next question, does the location of district programs matter to you? And if the answer is yes, please rank the importance of the following statements. I won't go through each one, but just very quickly here. The somewhat important for the location of the district program does not matter to me. If you could see, that's at 32% or just under 32%. That was sort of the highest ones. But if you look at the answers below, more of the higher numbers, the higher rated numbers or responses rather, fell under somewhat important and neutral. Okay, I won't go through each one just in light of time. Again, I invite you to just take more time if you'd like. I'm just rushing through this really quick, and please stop me at any time, Chair O'Neill, if there's any questions. What is your level of interest if the district were to expand existing programs or offer new programs at your child's school? The expansion of French immersion, for example, that was neutral. That was where most people responded. That was the first option. 353 people responded to that, which accounted for 47% of responses. And then we go down to land-based learning. That was 35% under somewhat important. Eco-based program, that one was a higher one for this particular one, so very important. So top of mind, and that was of course mentioned in our meeting tonight earlier. Advanced placement programs, somewhat important for people, that was the highest rated. Secondary academies, for somewhat important, was the highest number there at 30, just under 39%. IB, or International Baccalaureate program, people were neutral on that one. That was where we got the most responses at 52.75%. And Montessori was the last option on that one. Most people chose the neutral option for that. In terms of the district examining options to address schools that are projected to be over capacity, in the event funding is not available to expand a school facility, please write your preference for how the district will address capacity. These are one of those big questions that we wanted to hear from people on. Requiring capital funding for expansion, that was the first option, and the very important was the most chosen answer on that one, or choice rather, at 56%, which accounted for 436 people in that response. Then we got into the catchment area boundary, somewhat important for that, and for the rest of them, you'll see that the higher numbers were mostly somewhat important, except for the reassigned students to or programs to other schools. Most people answered the neutral on that one. Okay, for the next page. Please rate the types of environmental education programs you believe the district should support. Now, if I can just point out that the highest rated choices for the 4 choices in this question survey, or in this question for the survey, were all very important. And so outdoor classrooms, nature-based classrooms, learning gardens, funding for nature-based educational programs, those again, like I'd mentioned, were all very important to the people that took part in this survey. In total, for example, and for this specific question, 797 people answered this question, and so that's an important note to point out, because not everyone answered every question. You can see that 8 people skipped this question. Okay, in terms of just questions, and like I just mentioned, there were a fair amount of number of people that took part in this large survey. Like I mentioned, it's an 11-minute survey, so that is a little bit of an undertaking for people to take part in, but I'm happy to say that the majority took part in it. I think the only question that most people skipped was the last question, which was question 19, and that was our open-ended question. I'll get to that in just a second. Recurring themes, and just this is me going through each page and just highlighting some pieces that I had just read over and over again. Improve outdoor areas. So for example, sports fields were mentioned, covered areas for students to sit, eat lunch or to study. Outdoor gardens, learning spaces were also mentioned a number of times. Also mentioned, or recurring theme, is upgrading equipment. So computers, for example, trades tools was mentioned, play structures was mentioned very often in there. And then keywords taken. And so this was me going through our survey, and there's a little tool in there that can pull out the words and how many times it's mentioned for each, for the survey in total. And so, for example, school, not surprising, what had the most mentions, but there was also mentions of outdoor spaces, like I had mentioned. That was one of the reoccurring themes. Upgrading or upgraded, kids was mentioned, equipment, computer equipment, gym, so on and so forth. Okay, next page on this. Almost there. What else do you think the district should know about? And that was question 19, and like I'd mentioned, this is the one that most people skip. So you can see there, the number that answered was 279. Those who skipped were 526. Now, of those 279, I invite you to take some time. There are some really good points in there, some really great advice for the district to follow, and some really thoughtful answers. People took some time, and so some of those reoccurring themes: reopening closed schools, bullying, facility upgrades, focus on Ladysmith, need more programs. And for that one, some of the keywords taken for that question: school, need, students, children, kids, community, and programs, all in that order. So from most mentions to least mentions. And that in itself, in a nutshell, is some of the pieces that I pulled from the results of the survey. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that last bit. I'm thinking of those thought clouds, you know, where the words show up, again, being a visual. So, okay, so I think we do have, this might be a good time for Trustee Keller had a couple of questions. So Trustee Keller, is now a good time for your questions?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, through the chair. So if I may, the first question should be fairly quick, and I appreciate the response that we got through the questionnaire. I'm quite pleased with the numbers, and the quality of the feedback that we have received is quite good, and I think it will serve us well in our process. My question is, when I was reading through the survey or questionnaire results, and I believe this is on page 111 of 142 of our agenda. It's the question that starts with, the district will examine options to address schools that are projected to be over capacity. And just I just want to confirm, because it came through to me as a bit strange. We had 790 responses to that question, but no comments. And I'm just wondering if perhaps somehow they got cut off, or if in fact there were no comments. Or perhaps the question didn't allow comments. So I just wondered, looking at most of our questions, we received around 30 comments or so, or more. And that one just kind of stuck out to me. So I wasn't sure if there may be a reason.
Thank you, Trustee Keller. Through the chair, if I may just take a moment, I've got the full survey open here, and I just want to confirm that that is the case. Oh, maybe it's not open here. Sorry. Maybe it was just cut off when I took this on, or if I can get a link to maybe the full survey here. And maybe I just didn't show that, because I believe, let me log in here. Apologies. Give me 1 second.
It's funny, we apologize for taking what's really a moment in time to sort of find this type of information that's literally at our fingertips, right? So do not apologize.
Thank you, Trustee O'Neill. I appreciate that. I had it open, but I had to restart my computer earlier on. No excuses, I should have had it open, but of course, Murphy's Law, if you know, something should happen, or rather. Okay, well, sorry.
We should all have 5 screens in front of our faces at a time.
Well,
right?
Exactly. Right? I usually do, but I'm working on just one today. So that question, let me just keep scrolling through the survey here, if you can bear with me for just a moment here, because I didn't record that in here. So this, right, 19 questions. So there's a few questions here. Trustee Keller, you had mentioned that was on page 111, right, of the
That's
agenda.
correct. And Mr. Burgos, I don't need an answer now. It was just if somebody could look into it and just confirm. It just looked a little out of place, given that a lot of the other questions had a number of comments.
And I wanted to, the reason why I wanted to just take this moment is I actually wanted to go into the survey, because I couldn't think off the top of my head if we did have an open-ended response, you know, to answer yes or no to you. And you are correct. There was no open-ended option for this specific question. There were some for other ones, like you had mentioned, like the question before, which was number 11 in the survey. There was an open-ended option. So I can't tell you exactly the reasoning why it was chosen that question 12 should have just been the way that it was without any open-ended response. And maybe Secretary Treasurer Walsh remembers. I don't.
Okay. So maybe we'll park that there. I see there's a number of other trustees that have questions, Trustee Keller, but you did have a question on process as well?
Yes, these are 2 unrelated questions, Chair. So would you like me to add myself back to the list, or go ahead?
maybe that would be considerate of other trustees, so I will make note that you're up again. Trustee Stanley, I see that you have a question. Oh, now I'm seeing, okay, yeah, I'm putting you on. Go ahead. That's
okay. Yeah, in the comments, I've said that my question is more about a process situation, but I do want to make a quick comment or suggestion for question 6, which asks about your child or student traveling to school by personal vehicle. I think this is really important information and that we should share this information with the city and regional district. I think that that's important for them to understand why children aren't riding their bikes to school, and that because they play a role, or they're the determiners of the roads and sidewalks, that sharing this information with the municipalities is an important information piece for them. Maybe we can get a little bit more sidewalks or bike paths. That's it.
Okay, so more of a comment then.
Yeah, my question is related to the upcoming section, which is about process.
Okay, and so, and I'm just reading the kind of interesting plan. I just, okay, so Trustee Higginson, it looks like yours isn't on the process, if I read that right.
Yeah, you know what, I'll just say it and then it's done. I just, as we're drafting this plan, I would like to really encourage staff to pay special attention to the unique situation that is occurring in Ladysmith. We have a small town that the schools located in the town are either closed or at the elementary level, very crowded. And we also have about 200 students who are bused out of the town to another school. And it's quite a complex situation there. And I think that for many years, Ladysmith has been quite patient with us while we figured out other things. So I'm just would really like to encourage staff to pay special attention to the complicated scenario that is Ladysmith and try to be creative in solving the situations in Ladysmith, in particular noting our environmental goals. So, busing 200 kids out of Ladysmith every day. If we are in a situation where those families stop choosing the district program that they are going to, then we would be in a bit of a conundrum in Ladysmith. So I just want to put a plug in for paying special attention to Ladysmith. It often gets overlooked, and I think that as a result, it's we're in the situation we are there. So that's it. Thank you.
Secretary Treasurer Walsh.
Thank you for the comment. I just wanted to tell the board that recently staff had I would say a very positive conversation with some of the staff at the City of Ladysmith, particularly with respect to growth and to make sure that we're aligning. It was more associated with school site acquisition, but of course that is hand in hand with the growth issues that were, or various issues brought forward by Trustee Higginson comments. So I just wanted to express appreciation for the comment.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to move back to Trustee Keller and then come back to you, Trustee Stanley, if your process wasn't, your process question still applies. Trustee Keller.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to echo Trustee Higginson's comments about the challenges in Ladysmith. I think that's very important as well. But going back to my question, related to process, and perhaps we'll touch on this a little bit. I'd just like to say, I know I see a lot of parallels with planning in the school system and the planning that I'm used to in my world. And I'd like to know a little bit more around how we get from, the initial public feedback and how we're proposing a process that links those to our board strategic plan and provides the board with an opportunity to provide some oversight at a time early enough in the process that allows the board to have an opportunity for, what's the word I'm looking for input early enough in the drafting process before things become somewhat more difficult to change. So I guess what I'm looking for potentially is some kind of a process that would allow us as a board to provide input on perhaps, I don't know if we'd call them proposals or ideas or concepts before we get to a draft. So rather than coming to us, from my perspective, to the, coming to the board, I would prefer to see us having an opportunity for early input, perhaps through a series of discussion papers or proposals that we can both provide input on and potentially even seek some further input from the community. I know that might add some time, but I think from a process perspective, it would be something that I'd be far more comfortable with than going straight from initial input to draft.
Okay, and that was a pretty lengthy comment / question, Trustee Keller. I'll invite, you know, any of our senior staff to maybe, you know, walk through that process, or, you know, that's a takeaway as a comment moving forward. So, Mr. Walsh.
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. So what I think what the vision would be is that the draft that we would be proposing as a result of this recommendation would be recognizing a number of the concerns, like the things that we're trying to fix with the plan, and certainly have some recommendations as to that. I think the kind of commentary stage, there's plenty of room to shift gears at that point. So let's assume, let's come up with Community X. And Community X is growing very fast, and we need to solve space for those kids in Community X. I think that what you would see in the draft is, you know, here is the problem, which the numbers are supported by, and here's how we got those numbers. Here's the potential solutions that have been crafted based off of the board's goals and the community feedback that we'd heard. And then it's not for the board necessarily to go yay or nay, and that maybe everything that we've got on that paper is great and it proceeds. It's more likely that what would happen is the board may say, okay, well, actually, either that's not the problem that we actually agree, staff, or, you know, we'd like you to go back and dig a little bit deeper into the problem, or alternatively, can you provide another solution? So maybe it's a little bit further on than perhaps the Trustee Keller is envisioning, but certainly we would see it as iterative in that sense. So I don't know if that solves the concern totally, but that's the vision that we have. Because at this point we've been so generic in our view of the LRFP, like we have our board goals and now we have some comments, but we want to take the opportunity to focus it. So if changes are going to happen, that's a great way for the board to have that more in-depth questioning and in-depth input to change it.
Thank you. Trustee Keller, did you have a follow-up to that?
Maybe if I may, just a quick follow-up through the chair. So perhaps some of what I was saying was similar to what Mr. Walsh had explained in different terminology. I think the point that I was hoping to make was just making sure that we have an opportunity as a board to discuss, I'll call them the proposals or ideas or concepts, before they're enshrined in a draft and presented to the public.
Yeah. So if I may, and I haven't sort of spoken too much this evening, but I'm just looking at the action sheet for the recommendation. No, sorry, that's the environmental stewardship. No, long range facilities plan. So if I flip to, and it's 106 in my agenda, so 107 in the other agenda packages. When I skip right to the bottom, it says staff will take the survey results and feedback to align with the board goals and draft a long-range facility plans for the board's approval. The draft plan will be presented to the business committee in the fall of 2020 for review and consideration, followed by the board approval for further consultation. And so from my perspective, I do see that there is room and opportunity for, in follow-up to the recommendation that we're looking at tonight, for it to not only come back to the board, but to come back to this committee and have some opportunities. Have I read that correctly?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is the intention, yes.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Brezovich, you had a question as well on this?
No, it was actually more of a comment just to piggyback on what Trustee Keller said. I think we have a real opportunity here to do this. I think it's important to listen to what he's saying about making sure that we really treat this as not something that we're going to get done quickly. We want to make sure that we get it done in a way that really truly is reflective of the board's values and the values of our communities, because we have had, as we know, facilities plans have been a stressful topic in this community, and it's led to a lot of hurt and conflict. And I think we have an opportunity here, if we do this correctly, we can hopefully finally do one that doesn't have that.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Trustee Brezovich. Trustee Stanley, did I come back to you? I can't remember. Are
Not
you
yet.
still on the speaker's list?
Yes, please.
If not, it's you.
Although you will recognize a theme, and so I echo Trustee Keller's comments/question. I was myself wondering why we weren't having a discussion about the long-range facility plan, at least in principle, before it went to draft, much for the same concerns that Trustee Brezovich just mentioned. So from what I'm hearing then is that it sounds like the staff are intending to bring a draft to the board, and then we can, alter, insert, provide feedback after that. I just want to make sure that those values, there's space for that. So I guess then following this conversation is that I'm wondering what that process would be like. I'm hoping that there would be some form of working session. And I see that Trustee McKay would like to comment. So, I'm wondering if there's going to be some form of working session, or and what specifically is the intended process for board input, at least in the notion of values and principles into the document in an informative way.
Okay, I am noting that Trustee McKay, Chair McKay, is there next on the speakers list. Trustee McKay.
Thank you. Sorry, I hit the wrong button there. Okay, so a couple things. First, I think it's always been contemplated since the very beginning of this process that the board has undertaken, that there would be an opportunity and working sessions available to the board to participate in the development of the plan. And so a working session is certainly something that is easily added to our schedules and will be based on the feedback that I'm hearing this evening, so I can plan for that. And then I have something separate, Chair, so if there's any other comments, I'm prepared to move the motion. But I can wait if there's further discussion.
Well, no, I mean, there is no one else on the speakers list, so I'll just insert myself, and thank you for that clarification, because that is how I recall as well that there would be opportunity for these for working sessions. So so thank you. And back to you then, if you have some additional questions, comments, or would like to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Let's see, just making sure I'm on the right page here. That the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, direct staff to draft a long-range facilities plan and bring the draft plan to a Business Committee meeting in the fall of 2020 for review and consideration.
Okay, I can see that that's been seconded by Trustee Barron.
May I speak to it?
You may.
Thank you. So I'm moving the motion at this point in time because I'd like to see us begin the next steps, and I think that we need to direct our staff to take that and begin the work that needs to be undertaken, recognizing that I have committed to following the layout out plan that we started some time ago in allowing the board to have a working session to make sure that it's reflective of our values and principles prior to bringing that back to the business committee for further public discussion, as well as inclusion for our stakeholder and partner groups. And so I believe that we need to get this underway, and that's my reasoning behind moving the recommendation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have a comment from Trustee Keller.
Thank you, Chair O'Neill. So I just want to actually speak in favor of the motion because I feel confident now that we've made a commitment to have a board working session that will, for me, fill in that gap between us receiving initial public input and creating a draft. So I appreciate that, and I will speak in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Stanley, you have a question?
I do, though I think Chair McKay may have kind of addressed my point. So I am too glad that we're moving forward on this. I think it's important to, well, move forward. With regards to the motion, I was wondering if it would be useful, or like if we needed to alter it to say bring it forward to a working session rather than have it be to the business committee meeting. That was my question. And then Chair McKay made the comment of inserting a working session between now and bringing the draft. So I guess I'm just seeking clarity and perhaps reassurance that the intent is to come to a working session first before coming to a business committee meeting.
May I speak to that, Chair?
Yes, you may.
Yes, my intention is to ensure that that planning is undertaken and that it goes to a working session prior to being brought forward to the business committee. I make that commitment to the board without an alteration to the motion.
Thank you.
Okay, I see for no further discussion on this recommendation, so I'm going to give that last opportunity for comments. Okay. I'll call the question and just ask that if you are opposed to this recommendation, please indicate so in the chat. Okay, seeing none, this is passed unanimously. Next up, Secretary Treasurer Walsh, 10.2 of the agenda, Environmental Stewardship Policy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I just want to express appreciation for the work of Mr. Burgos and team in receiving feedback on the environmental stewardship policy. So according to our own policies, it went out for feedback for the appropriate period of time. We did receive many comments and from folks in our partners and out in the general community, and you'll see those attached here to the agenda. What we thought as a process would be, though, however, is to bring it back to the committee, to have the business committee to have a quick look, rather than having the policy committee make the amendments prior to, or if there was to be amendments prior to the business committee seeing it. So what we're recommending is essentially that that the comments and the policy get sent back to the policy committee. The policy committee is then given the authorization to make the changes to come back for final recommendation for passage by the board.
Thank you for that information. I'll ask, is there someone, thank you. I see Trustee Stanley has moved the recommendation and it's seconded by Trustee Higginson. Okay, I'll ask the mover to speak on this.
Thank you. Yes. I don't know if I need to read it out or
yeah,
not.
Perhaps you should. I seem to be skipping that step, don't I?
Okay. That the business committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, refer the draft environmental stewardship policy together with the feedback received to the policy committee for consideration. So will share Secretary Treasurer Walsh's gratitude about the work done on the consultation, and I very much appreciate, a thank you to everybody who sent time or gave us the time to send us the feedback. And there's some really nice pieces or thoughts to consider, including some work on an AP that it feels like has already started. So I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful that we're gonna, give some careful consideration to the feedback and then bring it back to whichever committee meeting is appropriate. So I'm happy that we're moving forward on this.
Thank you, Trustee Stanley. Trustee McKay.
Thank you. That hard to follow that opening. Much of what I had planned to say was said. I think that this feedback we've received on this policy is some of the most thoughtful feedback I've seen over the years on policy consultation, and so I look forward to working on it with the committee. Thank you.
Agreed. And with that, I don't see any further comments, questions, debate on this. So I'm going to call the question. I'll ask that if you are in opposition of this recommendation, please indicate so in the chat. I see no opposition. So again, this recommendation is passed unanimously. And again, thank you for all the reports and information you've presented to us this evening, Secretary Treasurer Walsh. I've got marbles in my mouth tonight. Walsh and Dale and other staff. We'll now move on to new business. There is no new business for discussion tonight. And I'll just check here. No questions this evening. Thank you, Ms. Matthews. And I'll seek a motion for adjournment. Trustee McKay, seconded by Trustee Stanley. Everybody seems to be on that one. Oh, Mr. Saywell, did you have something to say, or?
No.
Okay, I thought you were going to say we
I got excited.
Meeting or something like that. All right, well, that concludes our meeting tonight. So thank you all. It's been motioned and seconded, the adjournment. Oh, all those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, passed unanimously. Thank you. Have a good night.